All right. Well, we are concluding our series today, and for me, that's always an exciting time to close out a series. And so we've been talking over the last 3 weeks about the idea of identity and where we find our identity. And we've started with this big premise, and it's a big one, that our identity is prescribed to us. It's not that we prescribe it. And and the reason we've talked about that is because we need to place our identity primarily in something bigger than ourselves. Because if we place our identity in the things that fade or the things that kind of rise and fall, so will we. And so if we place our life, if we place our strength on something larger than ourselves, we're going to be able to sustain some of life's biggest challenges. But we can wrongly put our identity in 3 different things. And if you've been here since the beginning, you know this, but I just talked about 3 different ones and what we accomplished, right? A lot of people put their identity in this. I did X, Y, and Z. This is my degree, or this is what I have done with my vocation, or this is what I'm able to produce with my life, and so therefore I am, right? And what we have, and when we think about this, right, is what we can accumulate with life, and so this becomes kind of a competition between you and your neighbor, and this becomes a competition or a comparison trap that we can easily get in, but what happens if we don't have what we have currently anymore? Does then our identity rise and fall on that? And so these are obviously weak things to prop ourselves up against, but the third one is what people think about us, which is one of the most challenging things, right? Especially in the age of the internet that we are now in. People have so much information and access to so much that it's easy to get lost in what people think about us. I mean, I grew up in the Stone Age, right, when there wasn't cell phones and the internet didn't exist, right? Dial-up came to my house at an early age, right? And so that dates me, right? That makes me older, right? It makes me older. And so, but the interesting thing was, even when I was without the internet, I still cared about this, but some of these have been enhanced. The problem is when we find our identity in these things, when we place our sole identity on them and they rise and fall, so too do our lives. And the things that we accomplish, if they're us, right, and the only thing that makes us, then when they fade, so do we. And the idea was this, that in the book of Daniel that we've looked at, is that the myth is that in Christianity we lose ourselves, but the reality is that we don't lose ourselves, we actually become our truest self. And I want to explain that for a moment. And so some of you, if you're new to faith and you're processing this out, this might be a lot to take in right away, but I think it's important to talk about, particularly as we conclude the series. Is at the very beginning of the Christian story, there is this garden. And in the garden is 2 people, Adam and Eve. And they're in the garden together, and whether you believe that this is mythology or whether this is factual, I mean, the reality is that in the Christian faith, we believe that God created man and woman, Adam and Eve, and that's where humanity started. Now, what happens in the garden is that things go south because temptation enters the picture and sin distorts things. And sin, it says, permeates everything, even to creation. In the New Testament, as we jump thousands and thousands of years forward for a second, sin permeates everything. And it's not something that we need to find our identity in. You see, and people get confused by this because when we talk about sin, it's like we're projecting an identity onto somebody. But the Christian faith moves us past sin, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But thousands and thousands of years later, sin permeates everything with Adam and Eve, but then down the road, it even says in the New Testament that creation groans for redemption. In other words, that it's permeated everything in the world, and it's made deep roots in our lives. And what sin does, and this is the confusion, because I think people, when you hear the word sin, it's like, I knew it. I was going to come to church and I was going to hear it. But the reality is that if we don't believe that it exists, then we don't believe that it can make an impact on our life. So if all that the problems in the world, if they're distilled down as a lack of education, then all we need to do is educate ourselves past the things that distort ourselves. But we all know this, is that education can only go so far. There seems like there's a proclivity towards different things in our life. There's certain things that we're drawn towards that we have a tough time breaking. And the reality is that sin distorts our truest self. But the beauty of Jesus is the myth is that we lose ourselves, but the reality is he redeems us and he brings us back to who we truly are. And the good news is that we can truly know ourselves and be ourselves in the world. We don't have to fake it until we make it. We can know our truest selves and operate as our truest selves. But the reality is that there are some lies that come up against that. There's lies that come up against who we are. But God calls us three different things, and I just outlined them as three different C's, and there's much more than this, and the list goes on, and it can be very exhaustive, but I tried to distill it as much as possible. The first one is this, is that he calls us called. He calls us daughters and sons, not because of what we've done, but because of what Jesus has done. And he calls us sons and daughters, and he calls us salt, and he calls us light, and he calls us whole. It's an amazing thing that he calls us, but we're called. The second thing is this, is what we're capable, that he's actually, when we rely on his strength and we lean into how he's created us, we are capable to accomplish amazing things. Like God gives us strength beyond our own strength, wisdom beyond our own wisdom, and gives us direction beyond our own pursuits. That we're capable to accomplish the things that he's called us to do. And the last one is this, is that we're complete. That he makes us whole, and that we don't need to find a part of ourselves in maybe another relationship or in a larger paycheck, or that we need to find ourselves in what we can people liking us or in what we can accumulate, even though none of those things in and of themselves are bad. But that there's something more meaningful that we can find, and that our completeness isn't found in the things that are created, but it's found in the one who creates. And so our Heavenly Father prescribes this to us. He says, you're called my sons and daughters. You don't have to earn it. You are just my sons and daughters. That you are capable when you rely on me to accomplish what I've set you out to do. And last is that you're complete. That in Jesus, in me, that you're complete. And this is a gift that he gives for those that choose to put their faith and their trust in him. And when our identity is found and rooted in God, we're able to accomplish incredible things. And what I mean by incredible things is maybe not what seem like world-changing activities, but it might be showing up again in your parenting journey. It might be preferring another over yourself. When you have a confidence in who God has made you, and that you understand that the greatest gift that you've been given is God's love and grace towards you, that you can rest in that and you can look beyond yourself. It's being able to, like this morning, just before, give the shirt off your back, to somebody else. Saw that happen today. These are the things that God, when we find our confidence in him, he gives us the strength to accomplish great things. Now, the reality is that pivotal circumstances happen in all of our life, and we can't choose when they happen or what happens. They just happen. I don't know if you've noticed this, but they just happen. Like that driver in traffic on Monday morning, right, tomorrow morning, it just happened. You don't know why it happened, but that driver cut you off and it happened, right? We can't control it. We kind of wish that we could by chewing them out in our car by ourselves. You know what I mean? I would have never done that, right? Controlling, right? But we don't know why some of these things happen. And there's obviously larger things in life that take place. And there's things that are out of our control. And so what do we do when pivotal circumstances happen or challenges happen? What happens when we face that crisis of faith, or we face that challenge that we thought, I never wanted this? Now, we all face these at some point, but Daniel has a type of faith, and we've looked, and his friends over the last number of weeks, has a type of faith that's rooted in something deeper. And just to catch you up, Daniel, in the first week that we talked about this, was like, I don't want a part of your dietary plan. When he was exiled from his country and he was brought to another country, and a king tried to reprogram him and indoctrinate him into another religion, he's like, I don't want any of it. I'm just going to stand on my own 2 feet, and I'm going to rely on God. And so his faith saw him through Week 1, we saw that through even a simple dietary plan where he was still able to function and do his job better than the people that were around him. And then we looked at, in the week 2, we looked at the fiery furnace, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were able to navigate a fiery furnace. They didn't ask for it. They weren't like, fiery furnace, fiery furnace. They weren't chanting it. And none of us asked for the pivotal circumstances in our life, but they happened to us. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are facing this terrible challenge. And yet we talked about it and we sang about it today, that there was another in the fire with them. And they say something in their story. They say, even if it doesn't go the way that we thought, God, we're going to hang on to you. I mean, think about that kind of faith. And then we talked about the 2 kings last week. And we talked about our identity getting lost a bit in pride. And that when we put our faith and our trust in God, that we can lean back into the things that he's called us to be. And today we're going to conclude the series with Daniel in a very famous story, Daniel in the lion's den. Now, Daniel at this point is on his 3rd king. King Nebuchadnezzar was the first, and then the second one is Belshazzar, and then he's on King Darius or Cyrus. They're the same. Many scholars believe they're the same person, same historical figure. They're just called different names. Now, what's happened in the meantime between chapters 5 and 6 in Daniel is there's been the death of a king and the anointing of a new one. But there's also been a flip of an empire. So Belshazzar was part of the Babylonian kingdom, and then Darius or Cyrus, is part of the Persian kingdom that was coming in to take over Babylon. And so they've taken over Babylon. So David has not just switched kings, but he switched empires. It's a new time of reprogramming and re-indoctrination and restructuring and re-leadershiping. And so a new leadership comes in. And when King Darius comes in, what happens is he goes, you know what, there's too many people at the top. And so he goes, I'm going to take 3 leaders at the top, and I'm going to disperse all that responsibility to 120 leaders. And they're called satraps in the story. And so at the beginning of Daniel chapter 6, what happens is there's a new king, there's a new empire, and then he's flattened the leadership structure because most kings knew that when you come in and you lead, you can't trust as many people. And so he flattens it to make 120 satraps, or these leaders of the nation. Daniel gets put as one of the top 3 of these satraps. And so people don't like it. And they make a plan to destroy Daniel's life. He doesn't ask for this, but it comes up, and he has to face it. Now, what's interesting is most scholars believe that Daniel, by this point, is 80 years old. Now, there's something about growing up that when you reach a certain age, you just care less about certain things. Do you know what I'm talking about? No? Have you not noticed this? Okay. I find that people that are a little bit older care less about certain ways that you perceive them, right? They don't really care as much, right? Maybe it's what happened in the parenting journey or the grandparenting journey. You're just like, I made it, maybe it's that, or maybe it's something else, but there's just something where you're more settled in who you are. And so Daniel has years and years and years of faith, and we find ourselves in this journey where there's all these different leaders, they're vying for the power, and Daniel's just steadfast in who he is, but there's a plot that comes up against him. And so they don't like who he is, and so this is where we find ourselves in today's verse, is Daniel up against a number of different satraps who want to take him out. And at this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. Why? Because they could find no corruption in him, because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. I mean, that sounds like a great hire. Anybody with me? Yeah. Finally, these men, I know. Yeah, okay. Finally, these men said, we will never find any basis for charges against this man. But Daniel, unless it has something to do with the law of his God. I find this fascinating because it's not about character, it's not about competence, it's about winning. And this is not a far cry from some of the things that we see culturally around us. A whatever it takes attitude to get to the top. I mean, if you don't believe me, just go in comment sections of anybody's posts, right? There's this ability to tear down. And so it's not a far cry from some of maybe even our stories. But let's continue. So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, "May King Darius live forever." Okay, we get it. All right, next one. "And the royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce a decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den." Couple of things here to unpack, and some of this is just me nerding out on history, and so you can live with it for a few minutes. But some of this is important. Most ancient cultures did not worship, especially around those Adriatic nations, didn't worship human beings. They didn't worship kings. I mean, Egypt is one that you know of Pharaoh, and Pharaoh would have been, with Ra, you know all this kind of overlap with the human god aspect. But this wouldn't have been true in Persian culture or Babylonian culture, so it's quite unusual. And so because the scholars believe that Darius thought, "Oh, I'm a little bit new, and so maybe I can garner more credibility, or I can rally more people around myself. If people start praising me more, this might work out well." And so they're really playing into his ego here. But one thing that's also fascinating is there's really no accounts of lions' dens. This wasn't really something people did. So it wasn't like, you know what? I'm going to establish my kingdom, and one of the first things we need to do is get a lion's den. Like, this just wasn't something that was very common. It's actually quite uncommon. And so it's not seen throughout history much. There's a few different examples of it, but not much. So it seems like they come up with this strategy. And see what happens next. The king seems to want to buy into it. In the next verse. "Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Medes, and the Persians." We just have a Medes family here, so I just got confused, okay? "And Persians, which cannot be repealed." And so basically when you put it into writing, you can't repeal it. The truth is that he could have, but it would be deeply embarrassing to take over a new nation, issue a decree, and then retract it, right? Who wants that PR nightmare? Okay, so next. "So King Darius put the decree in writing," right? Okay, this sounds like a good plan. People are going to worship me. Sounds really good. Let's go to the next one. "Now, when Daniel learned the decree," and I want you to see what happens here next, that the decree had been published, he went to his home upstairs, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. And 3 times a day he got down on his knees and he prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done, look at this word, before. I mean, there's something about Daniel's life that in the midst of crisis, he didn't just try to implement it then. It's kind of like what we try to do for things like small groups, is we try to get a community of people around you because we know that things are going to happen in life and you're going to have a support system around you. And you can either do that in the middle of a crisis situation, or you can preemptively think that through and make it a part of your life. Same with prayer. Prayer wasn't an afterthought for Daniel. It was a part of his life in his everyday. And this is an essential part of the story. And there's 2 things about the prayer here that I want to focus on. The first one of this is this: the windows open towards Jerusalem would have been very common for Jews to pray towards Jerusalem, would have been something that was a part of the Jewish law. The second thing that's interesting here is this, is that it says he prayed 3 times a day and he got down on his knees. This was not part of Jewish law and it was not part of Jewish culture. So where did it come from? It actually came from the Persians. Persians would have prayed 3 to 5 times a day towards their gods. And so Daniel said, rather than praying towards the gods of this nation, I'm going to pray towards my God. Now, here's why I bring it up. Is there's some things that we get inspired culturally, and the church has a tough time knowing what to do about it. But there's 3 things that have really helped me in discerning what might be a helpful practice in our lives or in my personal life. One is that you can outright reject something. I call them the 3 R's. You can reject something and be like, you know what, this isn't any good, and so I'm just going to reject it outright. But there's some things culturally that are redemptive, that are good practices, but maybe are done for the wrong purpose or aren't great, and so you can redeem them. That they're not something we need to totally reject, but we can redeem them. And the third one is receive. You can completely receive something. And these 3 R's are helpful in parenting. They're helpful in my spiritual walk. I didn't come up with them. I don't know where they came from, but at some point along my pastoring journey, I heard them and I've implemented them. And here's why I think this is important. It's because Daniel implemented a practice from the Persians that made him stronger in his own walk with God. Now, I know that opens up a big can of worms, and for some of you, you're like, oh, what are you getting into here exactly, Josh? But what I want to say is this, is that Daniel always had fidelity towards his own God. He had this commitment to say, you know what, despite me being exiled, but despite me going to another country, God, I commit to you. And prayer wasn't an afterthought because he needed a quick fix. Prayer was connection and communion with God. And I'm going to be straight up, church. You can't just manufacture that. Like one day, just be like, God, right now, you can pray at any point. But there's a connection with God that comes through habitual practice and spending time with him repeatedly. That you just can't manufacture any other way. And so Daniel has this as a part of his life. It's a part of his rhythm. And before we go to the next part of the story, it's important that we understand this. But let's go to the next verse. Then these men went to a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. How dare he, right? But he's praying. He's like, I don't care. Maybe it's because he's 80, but maybe it's because he has a faith that saw him through 3 kings who led their kingdoms 3 different ways. And there was somebody that outlasted and outlived them all. And there will be somebody who outlasts and outlives us all. There is one. And so Daniel relies on the God who will outlive and outlive us all and outlast us all. He says, I'm going to root my faith in something bigger than an idea of the day, bigger than what this leadership is going to tell me. I'm going to root myself in something that's going to outlive and outlast me. And so he continues. Here's what happens next. And so they went to the king and spoke, did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except for you, your majesty, would be thrown in the lion's den? Look at the next verse. The king answered, the decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed. Yeah, next verse. And then they said to the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. Next verse. And when the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. Why? Because somebody didn't worship him? No, he was determined to rescue Daniel. I did something I shouldn't have done and made every effort until sundown to save him. I mean, that's how vital it seems like Daniel is to his kingdom. Look at what happens next. And then the men as a group to the king came to King Darius and said to him, remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed. They're like, okay, we get it. We totally get it. You can't change it. Next one. And then the men, so the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. Then the king said to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve, continually rescue you. And Daniel's like, he's done it before. He's done it before. I'm sure he's scared. But he's thrown into the lion's den. Did he choose it? Did he ask for it? Did he put up his hand? I don't think any of those 3. And yet he finds himself there. And what ancient cultures would do is they would throw people into situations, typically with fire or water, and they would say, well, if you're innocent, your God will save you. And if not, well, then we were right. Well, it's about to take place, and so here's Daniel's story. As the stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. There's no way out for Daniel here, right? And there's situations that we believe are impossible. We face them. And if we're honest with ourselves, we feel the effects of those things. We feel the effect of a situation where we're not quite sure where God is going to show up or when he's going to show up. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. Look what happens next. At first light, the dawn, the king got up and heard the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions? That's what he says next. Daniel answered, may the king live forever. May God has sent his angel and shut the mouth of lions. They have never hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight. Nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty. Then it says the king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the lion's den. And when Daniel was lifted out from the den, no wound was found on him because he trusted in his God. You see, there's something that this story holds about faith. But it's easy to say, you know what, that happened thousands of years ago, and can it really happen now? Well, I want to share Jordan's story with you. He drums at our church. He's got 5 kids. He's married to Vanessa, who also sings up here. And he wants to share his story about faith. And it's like his Daniel in the Lion's Den story. And I pray that this encourages you today the way it's encouraged me. Why don't you turn your attention to the screen?
My name is Jordan Vantal. I'm the guy walking around with 5 kids and my wife, Vanessa. I'd like to tell you a story, if I could. And I'm not at the end of my story. I'm still working through my story. But I just want to share with you guys a little bit of what I've learned so far. And hopefully we can all learn together. I'm the kind of guy, I'm a skeptic. I'm always looking for reasons why it might not happen, maybe a little pessimistic. I'm kind of like, yeah, God could do it, but will he do it? You know what I mean? Like, I ask these questions, right? I'm always looking to the, maybe it won't happen instead of maybe it will happen. So I'm working through these issues. And so I'll tell you a few stories that have happened in my life and then share with you kind of like the faith journey that I've been on because of that. This is when I'm a teenager. So I'm going through a little bit of a crisis of faith at this point in time. And now I'm thinking, oh man, like I really feel like God is pulling at my heart and wants to do, some special stuff. But I just haven't heard from God in a long time. And I'm really desiring to communicate, to talk with him. Like, I'm looking for a relationship. So I'm sitting on a pair of steps one day, overlooking this huge valley in this small little town. And I'm feeling really lonely and just kind of like down in the depths. And I'm like, God, I really want to have a relationship with you. I just don't really know if you're real. I want to do this, but I don't know if you care for me. And like, as I'm saying this, I see across the valley, I see this little yellow dot, like it's got to be a person kind of coming down this valley on the other side. And I remember saying, God, I need somebody to talk to. I'm hurting here and I need somebody to talk to. Can you send that person to come talk to me? Like, if you send that person, I'll know for sure that you're real. And so I sat there and I watched this little yellow dot kind of come down the hill, past a couple intersections, go through town, blah, blah, blah. It keeps on getting closer and closer to me, walking slowly but surely, getting closer and closer, and takes a right turn, heads right up the stairs that I'm on, up on the side of this valley, off the beaten path, starts walking right up towards me. And I'm like, my heart's beating. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. And the person walks right by me. And I was like, wow, that was pretty crazy. Like, God, you almost blew my socks off. And as soon as I said that, I felt a tap on my shoulder. And the person had turned around and come back and looked at me and was like, hey, do you need somebody to talk to right now? Like, you look like you need somebody to talk to. And I was just like, I don't remember anything after that. I don't even know if I talked to that person. I was just like, mind blown. Wow, God, you really care for me. I don't know what it is, but you just answered my prayer, like really, really in a big way. I was blown away by it. Fast forward again. Okay, so I'm an adult now. I'm in construction. I got a big company. I'm running, 3 or 4 different sites. I got guys here, guys there, and we're running out of work. We don't have any more work lined up. And I got a bunch of guys that I'm trying to provide for. And I remember I was with one of my partners at a meeting. We tried to get some work from another company. And they basically told us, we don't have anything lined up for a long time. So me and my lead framer, we go out. He's a Christian guy too. We go into his car, and I'm like, hey man, let's pray. Like we got nothing left. Let's pray. So we sat there in the car and we were like, God, like this is the end of the road for us. If we don't get any more work, like I gotta disband the company. We gotta call it quits and do something else. And so we prayed, and after we were done praying, like I drove home, and it was kind of like, okay, that was it. On the way home, I passed by a job site that I see really close to my house, like right next door to my house. I'm just gonna pop in here for a quick second. And I end up talking to a site supervisor guy, which leads to me getting the job at this huge construction site, and basically was the most profitable, longest job I ever had in my construction company. Like it brought me, I was like almost down at like bankruptcy, and it was like, boom, God brought me right back up and just provided like so huge for me. There was another instance where God was just like, boom, huge answer to prayer for me. So then fast forward again, I'm in Africa. This is last year. We're adopting our baby girl, Rhea, from Africa. It's a pretty stressful process. I'm like, my life's in God's hands. My kids' lives are in God's hands. And we're really trying to, I have 5 weeks that I'm there for. After 5 weeks, I have to leave the country because I got to get back to work. That's when our flights are. And we need our daughter's passport. We got to have it. Before I can leave the country, I have to have baby Rhea's passport. The people that are in control of the passport are like, we're trying to get it to you, but we, like there's paperwork problems, there's problems. All the way, I'm in the last week. It's like, it should be in by now, but it's not. I'm starting to get nervous, and I'm praying to God. I'm like, God, we really need this. Like I do not want to leave my wife and my kids in a different country without me. Like this could go really bad. No answer. The day we go to bed, we wake up the next day where I'm going to the airport. I'm leaving my wife and kids back here because we're like, the passport's not coming in. On the way to the airport, we get a call, your passport's in. Boom. It's like God answered our prayer again. It was like, but the thing that was weird about it for me was I was like, God, why would you save that answer for the very, very last day? You know what I mean? I'm like, you could have answered me a week ago, and it would have been a nice, like a pretty chill week for me. I could have had a good, like I would have been so much more calm and all that kind of stuff. Like it just would have been way better, but you saved it till the very last day. Why did you save it the last day? I just felt like God was saying, I'm training you right now to have faith in me, because I'm going to do good works, and you're not having faith in me right now. You need to trust me all the way to the end. You need to trust me that I'm going to do great things in your life. I'm going to do powerful things in your life. And I felt like God was even saying, to the point where he was saying, I'm training you for the next thing. I remember coming away from that trip and saying to myself, whatever faith lesson comes next, I'm going to be ready for it, because this one really trained me for it, right? Like I was like, God specifically gave me that. And then I got cancer in September. I was diagnosed with cancer. And I remember as soon as I got that news that I had cancer, that was the first thing that popped into my head, was this is the lesson that he taught you already. You already know the answer to this. And I just remember being filled with, like God filled me with so much faith at that point in time. And it wasn't because I had faith. It was because God had given me all the reasons in the world to have faith in him. Everything had already been set for me. I had no choice but to just be like, completely trustworthy in God that he was going to do something great. And I remember telling the people closest to me too, I said, guys, watch, because God's going to do something crazy here. God's going to do something special because he cares for us. And he has done so many good things in my life and so many special things in my life, and he's not done doing those special things. And so when you see the things, when you look in your life and you see the authority that Jesus has and God has in your life, you'll have no choice but to have faith that he's going to do great things in your life because he's got the authority to do it. We don't get to say what God is going to do. We don't know what God is going to do, but we do know this. We do know that he cares for us and he loves us and he's going to do something great. And that's enough for you to put your full weight on right there. But the ending to the cancer story, or like the journey that I'm on with cancer right now, is I went to go get scanned at the doctor and they gave me a PET scan and all these scans, and basically the doctor's like blown away and he's going, this is an unbelievable result. Like there's nothing left. You don't have any cancer anymore. Like we're like, it's your scans are clear. So another amazing thing that God is doing in my life. And that's only because he's got the authority, right? He's got the authority to do these things, right? And even if it was an answer that wasn't, you're fully healed, I still have faith that God is going to do something great and something special and something powerful because he cares. He cares so much for us. He cares about the little things in our life. Just like even me sitting on a pair of steps and just being like, God, I need to feel you. I need to see you. God cares about that little moment. So he's definitely going to care about the big, cancer question or the bankruptcy or the, marital problem or whatever it is that you're going through. He's definitely going to care about that. So my challenge just to people is keep your eyes open for the things that God is doing, because when you see the authority that he has, that's where the faith comes in. When you see the authority that he has, you'll be blown away and you'll be like, wow, God can do it, right? So that's my story right there.
So I just want to take a moment. He filmed this 3 months ago. He said a line in there. Even if it wasn't the outcome that I wanted, that I still trust that he has great things for me. As you came into church this morning, I chatted with you. All week long, I've heard stories of people with big challenges. Can you take a moment with me? It might be you today. I want to take a moment to collectively pray. Here, now, to pray for the things that we face. As we've heard about the fiery furnace, if we've heard about the lion's den, as we've heard about these things that feel insurmountable and impossible, that God is here and available to walk with you. And so my prayer is that you wouldn't walk out the same way you walked in today. And so I want to take a moment to pray. It might be you that's facing the challenge. It might be somebody that you know. But I just want to go before God this morning and say, God, regardless of outcome, give us the faith for the journey. Regardless if we see all that we want to see, God, that you would give us the confidence in you. So can you pray with me today? Why don't you close your eyes wherever you're sitting? And if there's somebody on your mind, if it's you, if you're facing something personally, or your family, or in your marriage, if you're facing something with maybe it's your neighbor, let's go before God this morning. And then if you're like, I've never prayed before, I don't know how to pray, well, open yourself up and say, God, if you're here, we open ourselves up to just pray to him today and say, God, show yourself to me. So let's pray. Heavenly Father, I know that you're close and you're near. We're told that you're near to the brokenhearted. There are things that people are facing today that seem impossible, that weigh heavy on their hearts. So God, I pray today that you would reveal yourself to them. Show that you care, that you would pour out your grace, that people would sense your peace. That regardless of what we face, God, that we can know that you're with us. God, we pray for the faith to get through what's next. That if it's a small detail of life or a large detail of life, God, that our hope would be rooted in you. The one who shut the mouth of lions. The one who walked through the fire. The one who emptied out the grave. The one who stands with his people, goes before and behind, to our left and our right. That God, you surround your people. God, I pray today for your presence and for your peace and for faith. God, thank you for each and every person that, God, you know the situation and you're there to meet them. As we conclude this series, God, where there are lies that are trying to steal who we are and who you've called us to be, would you show us the truth? And the lions that we face, these external pressures to be something or that feel very real, that are threatening our soul, are threatening our peace, are threatening our joy, that those lions in our life, God, that they would be stilled. We look to you, God. We thank you as we head into this week that we're not alone. God, we never have to be alone, that you're always with us. God, we thank you for that today. Amen. If you are facing something, we have a prayer team every Wednesday morning that meets, and we would love to pray for you. And so at our guest services in the foyer, if you got something you want prayer for, let them know. I'll be up here. Don't walk out without having somebody praying for you and supporting you. So I love you very much. As your pastor, I love you, church. And yeah. So know that you're loved. Know that God cares for you. And believe that he can still do great things. God bless you today. Have an amazing week. And we'll end there, and we'll see you next week at Centerpoint Church. Have a great day.